Honestly, Sergeant, are we sure this is your rifle and not something you borrowed from a museum? The young lieutenant's voice, slick with the unearned confidence of new authority, cut through the dry Nevada wind. The small crowd of operators, all younger, all male, chuckled nervously. They stood on the edge of the advanced qualification range, a place where legends were forged and careers were broken. The lieutenant, Keller, gestured with a dismissive wave at the weapon laid out on the shooting mat. It was a Barrett M82, but an older variant, its stock worn smooth in the places 100 different hands had held it, its metal finish faded to a dull gray by sun and sand. It was a tool, not a trophy. Master Sergeant Eva Rostova didn't look up. She continued her work, her hands moving with a slow, deliberate grace that was a stark contrast to the lieutenant's restless energy. She cleaned the bolt with a practiced, rhythmic motion, each wipe of the cloth a small prayer to the gods of mechanics and precision. The snickers from the assembled team didn't register, or if they did, she gave no sign. Her face was a landscape carved by time and focus, her eyes narrowed against the shimmering heat rising from the desert floor. She was an anachronism here, a woman in her late 40s surrounded by men in their 20s, a quiet presence in a world that celebrated noise. Keller, emboldened by her silence, pressed on. We're running M210S with integrated ballistics computers. Top-of-the-line glass. And you bring this. No offense, but this is a Tier 1 evaluation. We need operators who are current, not relics. The insult hung in the air, sharp and clear. A relic. An object belonging to an earlier time. He had judged her by her age, by her gender, by the vintage of her gear. He had made his assumption, loud and public. But when the four-star general overseeing the exercise, a man who had seen more war than Keller had seen birthdays, noticed her stance from his command tent 100 yards away, he put down his binoculars and began to walk. He had seen that posture before, that profound stillness, in places the young lieutenant only knew from history books. If you believe that true competence is spoken not with the mouth, but with the hands, type silence below. The general's approach went unnoticed by the small circle of arrogance. Lieutenant Keller was too busy enjoying his own voice. He saw Rostova's silence not as a sign of professional composure, but as an admission of inadequacy. It was a common mistake made by those who confused volume with value. "Look," he said, adopting a patronizing tone. "I appreciate you coming out, Sergeant. It's good for morale to have senior NCOs show an interest. But this final qual shot is a beast. We're pushing the system to its absolute limit today. It's a data-gathering exercise for the new platforms." He was dismissing her from the test, attempting to save her from a public failure he had already decided was inevitable. He saw a graying woman with an old rifle and assumed she was out of her depth. He didn't see the decades of discipline etched into the lines around her eyes. He didn't see the unnatural calm in her breathing, a respiratory control that could lower a heart rate to a meditative state under extreme pressure. He didn't notice the small, almost invisible pin on her uniform, just below her ribbons, a simple, unadorned badge that no one in the group recognized. It was small, unassuming, and easy to overlook, much like the woman who wore it. Rostova finished cleaning her bolt. With a click that was barely audible but felt profoundly final, she slid it back into the receiver. The action was as smooth as worn river stone. She settled behind the rifle, her body seeming to merge with the earth. She wasn't just lying on the ground, she was rooted in it. Her movements were a study in economy, not a single twitch or wasted motion. She adjusted the bipod, canting it slightly to match the terrain. She placed a single, massive 50 BMG cartridge into the chamber, its brass casing gleaming in the harsh sun. She had still not said a word. Her silence was becoming a presence in itself, a vacuum that was starting to make the others uncomfortable. The nervous laughter had died. Now, there was only anticipation. The target was a steel plate, 36 inches square, set on a distant ridge. The range was a number so absurd it sounded like a typo. 6,220 yards. 3.92 miles. A shot that was not just difficult, but statistically impossible for even the most advanced systems under these conditions. A shot for a computer, not a person. A shot for a relic. The official challenge was announced over the range radio, the voice of the controller crackling with a mix of excitement, and professional skepticism. Final qualification exercise is live. Target designated Hades. Range confirmed, 6,220 yards. Wind variable, 7 to 15 miles per hour. Full value cross from the west. Mirage is severe. Shooters, you have a 2-minute window. Good luck. The other snipers, the young guns with their advanced M210s, began frantically working their computers. They muttered about spin drift, Coriolis effect, air density, and muzzle velocity. Their screens glowed with complex calculations, algorithms trying to tame the chaos of physics over an unprecedented distance. Lieutenant Keller stood behind them, arms crossed, a smug look on his face. This was the future of warfare: data, processing power, technological superiority. It was a young man's game. Then he glanced over at Rostova. She had no computer. Her scope was an older model, its turrets scarred with the nicks and scratches of long use. She wasn't looking at a screen, she was looking at the world. Her eyes scanned the full distance to the target, reading the invisible rivers of air. She watched a hawk circling miles away, noting its drift. She saw the way the heat shimmered differently over a patch of shale versus a patch of scrub brush, each a subtle clue to the wind's complex dance. She pulled a simple Kestrel wind meter from her pocket, held it up for a moment, then put it away. It was a single data point in a sea of instinct. Her preparation was a ritual of stillness. She settled her cheek onto the worn stock of the Barrett, the place where her face fit perfectly, a custom-molded groove worn by thousands of hours of practice. Her breathing slowed, becoming imperceptible. In, hold out. A long, controlled exhale that seemed to empty her of all tension, all ego, all doubt. She was no longer a person. She was a component of a weapon system, the organic, thinking part of the machine. The younger operators were still wrestling with their technology, their faces tight with concentration. They were trying to force a solution. Rostova was waiting for one. She made a small, precise adjustment to her scope's elevation dial. A series of clicks, confident and sure. Then another for windage. Her movements were so calm, so unhurried. They seemed out of place in the high-stakes tension of the moment. She was simply doing her job. The 2-minute window was ticking away. The other snipers were growing frustrated. "I can't get a stable solution," one of them hissed. "The wind is shifting every 5 seconds." Keller paced behind them, his own confidence beginning to fray at the edges. His state-of-the-art systems were being humbled by the raw, untamable physics of the desert. He glanced again at Rostova. She was perfectly still, a statue of focused intent. Her left hand was curled gently under the buttstock, her right index finger resting lightly on the trigger. She was not fighting the conditions, she was flowing with them. She saw a momentary lull, a brief, almost imperceptible straightening of the mirage pattern a mile downrange. It was a window. It would last for perhaps 2 seconds. It was enough. The world seemed to narrow to the small circle of her scope. There was no sound, no lieutenant, no audience. There was only the shooter, the rifle, and the path. With the last bit of air eased from her lungs, in the silent space between heartbeats, she pressed the trigger. The explosion of the Barrett was a physical thing, a concussive wave that kicked up a cloud of dust and slammed into the chests of the onlookers. The massive rifle bucked against her shoulder, a beast momentarily unleashed, but she absorbed the recoil with a practiced fluidity, never losing the target in her scope. For a moment, there was only the roar of the shot echoing off the distant mountains. Then, silence. A profound, deafening silence that stretched for an eternity. The flight time for a bullet over that distance was more than 10 seconds. 10 seconds where everyone held their breath. 10 seconds of pure, unadulterated suspense. Keller had his high-powered binoculars trained on the target. He was expecting nothing. A puff of dust 100 yards short, maybe. A miss so wide it wouldn't even be comical. But then, long after the sound of the shot had faded, a tiny flicker of movement on the distant ridge. A small, almost invisible cloud of pulverized steel and paint bloomed from the exact center of the Hades target. It was followed, a fraction of a second later, by the unmistakable, high-pitched ping of a .50 caliber round striking hardened steel, a sound that traveled back across 392 miles of desert to arrive like a ghost. A perfect hit. Dead center. The silence was shattered by a collective, involuntary gasp. The other shooters lowered their rifles, their faces masks of stunned disbelief. Keller's binoculars sagged in his hands. He stared, his mouth slightly agape. "No," he whispered. "No way. That's not possible." General Marcus Thorne had seen it all. He had seen heroism in the mountains of Afghanistan and desperation in the streets of Fallujah. He had shaken the hands of presidents and held the hands of dying soldiers. He was a man for whom surprises were rare and miracles were non-existent. But as he watched the impossible shot through his own binoculars, a slow smile spread across his face. It wasn't a smile of surprise. It was a smile of recognition. He began walking from the command tent toward the firing line, his stride purposeful. The arrival of a four-star general on an active range was an event. The chatter stopped. The operators snapped to attention, all except for Rostova, who was already cycling the bolt on her rifle, ejecting the spent casing, her focus still on her process, the shot already a memory. General Thorne walked past the stunned Lieutenant Keller as if he were a piece of range equipment. He walked past the gleaming, computerized M210 rifles. He walked directly to the unassuming woman with the old Barrett and stopped. He didn't look at her face. He looked down at her uniform, at the small, simple badge just below her ribbons. The badge Keller had ignored. Thorne bent slightly, as if to read an inscription on a monument. His voice was quiet, but it carried across the now silent range with the weight of absolute authority. "Ghost Program," he said, reading the almost faded text on the badge. "Longest confirmed engagement, 6,220 yards." He looked up from the badge and met Master Sergeant Rostova's eyes. A flicker of mutual respect passed between them, a silent acknowledgement between two professionals who understood the true cost of their craft. The other operators looked at each other in confusion. Ghost Program? They had never heard of it. It was a name spoken only in whispers, a classified unit from a different era of warfare, a time before drones and satellites, when the skill of a single operator could change the course of a battle. A program of snipers who took shots that were officially denied, who operated in a world of shadows and plausible deniability. It was a legend, and she was a part of it. The truth of the moment began to dawn on them, a cold wave of realization. The badge wasn't a decoration. It was a record. She wasn't just attempting an impossible shot. She was recreating her greatest hit. The general straightened up. He looked at Rostova, not as a general addressing a sergeant, but as one warrior acknowledging another. "Master Sergeant Rostova," he said, his voice resonating with a respect that was more powerful than any medal. "Call sign, Echo." I remember the reports from the Zabul province. The one about the high-value target taken out during a sandstorm. A shot nobody believed was possible. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "They told me a ghost took that shot," Rostova finally spoke. Her voice was calm, low, and devoid of any triumph. "The wind was tricky that day too, sir." The simplicity of her statement was more powerful than any boast. General Thorne held her gaze for a moment longer. Then he did something that sent a shockwave through the assembled group. He brought his hand up in a slow, deliberate, and perfect salute. A four-star general saluting a master sergeant. It was a reversal of protocol so profound it was breathtaking. It was the ultimate gesture of respect, an acknowledgement that in the temple of pure skill, rank was irrelevant. Rostova returned the salute with a crisp, economical motion. Only then did the general turn his attention to the wider group. His eyes, cold and hard as chips of flint, swept over the young operators and landed, finally, on Lieutenant Keller. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His disappointment was a palpable force. "Assumptions," he said, his voice cutting through the silence, "are the enemy of readiness. They are the cancer of a professional army. Today, you judged a warrior by the age of her weapon, not the skill in her hands. You saw gray in her hair and assumed there was rust in her abilities." He took a step toward Keller, who seemed to shrink under the weight of the general's gaze. "That relic she carries," Thorne said, gesturing to the Barrett, "has done more to protect this country than every computerized rifle on this line combined. And the woman behind it. Master Sergeant Rostova was taking shots like this when most of you were learning to spell your own names. She is not a piece of history. She is a living lesson. A lesson in humility, in discipline, and in the profound, terrifying power of quiet competence." Class dismissed. The finality of his words was absolute. He turned his back on Keller and the others, and walked back toward his command tent, the matter, for him, being closed. The story of the shot, and of the general's public rebuke, spread through the base like a wildfire fanned by desert winds. It traveled through encrypted chats, hushed conversations in chow halls, and late-night talks in the barracks. It became instant folklore. They called it the Echo Shot. The phrase, "Don't be a Keller," became shorthand for the sin of arrogant assumption. The tale was a cautionary one, a modern military fable with a clear and potent moral. The physical evidence was undeniable. Range control had preserved the target, the perfect .50 caliber hole punched through its center. It was mounted in the lobby of the Advanced Marksmanship School, a silent testament to the event. Lieutenant Keller was shattered. The general's words had stripped him of his arrogance, leaving behind a raw, painful humility. He had been publicly dismantled not by an enemy, but by his own ignorance. For 2 days, he was a ghost himself, avoiding the mess hall, keeping to his quarters. The snickers that had once supported him had turned into looks of pity and contempt. He had 2 choices. He could let the shame consume him, request a transfer, and try to outrun his reputation, or he could face it. On the 3rd day, he found Master Sergeant Rostova on the same range, long after everyone else had gone for the day. She was alone, practicing wind calls, her focus as intense as ever. He approached slowly, cautiously, like someone approaching a dangerous but respected animal. His swagger was gone, replaced by a nervous uncertainty. He stopped a few feet away, his new lieutenant bars seeming to weigh heavily on his shoulders. "Master Sergeant," he began, his voice barely a whisper. He had to clear his throat and start again. "Master Sergeant Rostova, I came to apologize. What I said, the way I acted, there's no excuse. I was arrogant. I was unprofessional. And I was wrong." He stood there, waiting for her response, fully expecting a cold dismissal. He deserved it. He had insulted a living legend. Rostova didn't turn around immediately. She continued to watch the wind, her eyes tracing the subtle patterns in the dust devils dancing across the valley floor. She was giving his apology the space to be genuine, testing its weight. After a long moment, she lowered her binoculars and turned to face him. Her expression was neutral, unreadable. There was no anger, but also no pity. There was only a calm, professional assessment. Keller met her gaze, his own eyes filled with a shame that was real and profound. "I have no right to ask you for anything," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "But I saw what you did. I saw the way the general looked at you. I want to understand. I need to understand. Can you teach me?" The question hung in the quiet air of the evening. It was more than a request for instruction. It was a plea for redemption. He wasn't asking to learn how to shoot. He was asking to learn how to see. Rostova studied him for another long moment. She saw the broken pride, but underneath it, she saw something else. A flicker of genuine desire to learn, the first spark of true wisdom that can only be kindled by the ashes of humiliation. She gave a single, slow nod. "The lesson isn't about the shot, Lieutenant," she said, her voice even and calm. "It's about the process. It's about the discipline. It begins with respect, not for rank or for gear, but for the problem in front of you. It starts," she added, her eyes locking onto his, "with listening more than you talk." A new kind of silence settled between them, not the tense, awkward silence of before, but a productive one, the silence of a classroom where a student was finally ready to learn. The legendary brass casing from her 392-mile shot was later mounted on a simple wooden plaque and hung in the main hall of the sniper school. Below it, a single inscription: "Competence is the only voice that needs no amplification." The firing point from which she had made the shot was unofficially, but permanently, renamed by the instructors and students. They called it Rostova's Perch. A year passed. The story of the Echo Shot had become more than just gossip. It had been absorbed into the institution's DNA. It was a mandatory part of the introductory brief for every new officer candidate and every aspiring sniper who passed through the base. It was used as a case study in leadership seminars, a stark example of the dangers of bias and the profound strength of humility. The plaque with the brass casing became a pilgrimage site for young soldiers, a place to touch a piece of a living legend and reflect on the true meaning of being a professional. The change in Lieutenant Keller was remarkable. He was Captain Keller now, but the promotion was the least of his transformations. The brash, loud officer was gone, replaced by a quiet, observant leader. He spoke less and listened more. He judged his soldiers by their actions, not their appearances. He had become a student of Master Sergeant Rostova, spending his off-duty hours on the range with her, not learning the secrets of impossible shots, but the fundamentals of discipline, patience, and perception. He learned to read the wind not as a variable to be conquered by technology, but as a language to be understood. He learned that the most important distance a sniper must master is the 6 inches between their ears. He was now one of the lead instructors at the school, and his favorite lesson to teach was the one he had learned the hard way. He would stand his new students at Rostova's perch, point to the distant, almost invisible ridge, and tell them the story. He never spared himself in the telling. He was the fool, the arrogant gatekeeper, the cautionary tale. I looked at a hero and saw a relic, he would tell them, his voice filled with the quiet authority of a man who had earned his wisdom. I looked at one of the finest marksmen this army has ever produced and saw only her age and her gender. My assumptions nearly cost me my career. They could have cost lives in a real-world scenario. Never, ever, make that mistake. Your eyes will lie to you. The file will lie to you. The only thing that tells the truth is performance. The legacy of that day was not the impossible shot itself, but the culture it helped to reinforce. It was a powerful reminder that true strength doesn't need to posture or proclaim its own greatness. It simply is. It endures. Master Sergeant Rostova remained who she had always been, a quiet professional. She deflected praise, avoided the spotlight, and continued to pour her energy into her craft and into mentoring the next generation. When students would ask her how she made the shot, she would always give the same answer. One correct decision at a time. Her greatest lesson was not in marksmanship, but in character. She taught them that the ultimate expression of confidence is silence. It is the calm of the hurricane's eye, the stillness of the deep ocean. It is the knowledge that your skills are so deeply ingrained, so thoroughly mastered, that they require no external validation. They exist, and when the time comes, they will speak for themselves with a clarity and finality that no boast could ever match. True legacy isn't what you leave behind in a record book or a museum case. It's what continues forward in the standards and character of those you taught. The Echo shot was a singular event, but its echo would resonate for decades, a permanent part of the institutional memory, a story told to remind every new generation of warriors that respect is earned in silence and proven with precision. The quietest person in the room is often the most dangerous, not because of a capacity for violence, but because of a mastery of self that makes violence a tool, not an identity. Their competence is a quiet language, spoken in deeds, not words, and its message is always clear. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud arrogance, and where silent precision defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Tales.